A homily for Good Friday. Please read carefully the fourth servant song in Isaiah, chapter 52, verse 13 to chapter 53, verse 12, and the Passion narrative according to St. John, beginning in chapter 18 and continuing through chapter 19, verse 42. To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Isaiah asks us. My answer is, to all of us observing Good Friday today. Who has believed what we have heard? Isaiah also asks. Our growing in belief requires us to grapple with what the arm of the Lord has revealed through the prophet Isaiah about the Messiah to come, and through St. John about Jesus' last days. Let's start with Isaiah's text about the servant, as I have seen it lived out in a modern context. This brilliant text merits ongoing study among all of us. Today would be my mother's 104th birthday if she were alive. By her last year of life, bone cancer had rendered her appearance like that of the servant, marred beyond human semblance, such that her form was beyond that of mortals. But she startled many nations, and kings shut their mouths because of her. Well, not nations nor kings exactly, but the dozen secretaries with whom she worked at the local university. She startled them, and they stood in awe in her presence at the extraordinary courage she displayed despite her illness, and the great kindness she offered everyone who visited her, just as Jesus did at the Last Supper. One evening before she died, she and my father were sitting in the living room, he reading, she staring at a picture on the wall. At one point, she pointed toward the picture and said to my father, "Is that Jesus?" He was taken aback, and said nothing. My father was never at a loss for words, so her statement had startled him and made him shut his mouth. After her death, he recounted this story, telling me that he was convinced that he had seen Jesus. That which has not been told about Jesus, my father had seen through my mother, just as Isaiah said. What he had not heard, he could now contemplate. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. I believe that Jesus was helping my mother bear her grief, her sorrow, and her pain as she approached death, and that in doing so, he created a space inside her that freed her to love yet more fully and to face death peacefully. Her co-workers who visited her faithfully did so not simply out of care and concern, but also to be in her peaceful, welcoming presence. She startled many people, and all stood in awe of her. This is what Jesus, the risen Messiah, does for us. He helps us bear our grief and carry our sorrow, so we can gain some peace to share with our suffering world. He was wounded for our transgressions, Isaiah says, and not just our transgressions, but also those of Vladimir Putin, white supremacists, Antifa, the Saudis, Iranians, and us in Yemen, and all who create suffering. He was crushed by their iniquities, like the Ukrainians, the Uyghurs, the Sudanese, the prisoners in our jails, and the homeless on our streets. St. John shows us how Jesus accomplishes this. After Jesus had been bloodied by flogging, Pilate brought Jesus out before the people, still wearing his ironic purple cloak and the crown of thorns. Pilate seated him on the judge's bench in the place called the stone pavement, in Hebrew, Gabbatha. This symbolic masterstroke reveals Jesus as the judge, not the one judged. As judge, Jesus revealed the Romans' injustice, the religious elite's hypocrisy and vengefulness, and the crowd's fickleness. Then he was crucified at noon in broad daylight. In the Gospel of John, light reveals the truth about Jesus, in this case, Jesus the King who reigns from the cross. He met the Samaritan woman at noon, and she recognized him. He met Nicodemus at night, and Nicodemus did not. Each time Jesus revealed himself to people, they were startled, and they shut their mouths. We might not be startled because we know how the story ends. But let's at least be humbled and silenced by the horror of it all, especially on this night of Jesus' betrayal and crucifixion. At this moment, we can only grieve and mourn, trusting that something will happen to allow us to emerge into new life someday.